Hi everybody, this is Mary Petrie, your gender studies instructor, and I thought it would be easier to discuss the research project through a video so that way I can perhaps convey some more of the nuanced elements of the research project. Plus, it takes me a lot less time to talk than to write, and there's a lot to convey. So, so the research project, I'm going to check it out here. There are 5 categories of content that you want to cover. So my first pieces of advice, the first and most important is pick something you care about. Pick something that you're truly interested in, something that you feel you could contribute to. So think of something that really interests you and your work will always be better. Second, write your project to the grading rubric. So take a look at the grading rubric because that's what I'm going to use to assess your project, and make sure that you've done all the work in those areas and that you can identify how your project fits into the grading rubric areas, and we'll go through that. And the third thing is to go through each of those 5 categories of content for the project. You'll see that the 5 categories of content match the grading rubric. So if you really work in those 5 categories of content, you're going to get the grading rubric down. So those are the 3 things. Keep in mind the categories of content. Be sure you look at the grading rubric and work toward that, and pick something you care about. The other thing to consider is, well, a couple of things. First, there are no word count requirements except for the vision statement. Let me just check and make sure that I'm correct in remembering that the vision for the future, oh, nope. I'm having trouble seeing because that light is blinding from the camera, sorry. So no word count requirements at all for the project. I couldn't remember, I changed this slightly. So no word count, no page requirements, no minimum, do this, do that, you have to have 500 words, etc. This actually makes it more difficult because it has to be good. All I'm looking for is quality, not word count, not quantity, not jump through these hoops, but is this a rich, nuanced, sophisticated piece of thinking and research. And I quite purposely stayed away from those minimum word count requirements because in college, everywhere you go, including in this class, there's a rubric. You have to write 500 words. You have to post this discussion, do this quiz. So much of education is kind of routinized and boxed in and data driven. And I want this to be more meaningful and to be more content driven and more organic to your process. So it doesn't mean it's easier or they're going to whip through anything. It just means that you as a scholar and student should feel like, I covered this. I did a thorough job. I explained it. And at this point in your careers as academics, as students, you should be able to tell. So there are no minimums. The other piece is that the research project doesn't have to be a paper. And the project could be a video. You could do a video. You could do audio, especially if when you interview people, you could have audio files. The project could be a PowerPoint. The project could be a website, a movie. It can be or it could be more like a paper. Whatever you want it to be, that's what it should be. So you can also have different parts of the project be formatted differently. So for example, when you pick an issue, you might want to just write that issue in a paragraph. But when you define the problem, maybe you have a PowerPoint. And when you collect data or when you interview people, you have that as an audio file. So you could divide up your delivery vehicles, if you will. So let's go over the project itself very briefly. So the first one is to pick an issue, and here is your chance to specifically narrow down and tell us what your issue is. So for example, let's say gender roles. You're interested in gender roles. What shapes a man? What shapes a woman? Why do we have those categories? What purposes do they serve? Well, that's not really an issue. So gender roles is a concept, a thing, but it's not an issue or a problem. So instead you might say, well, mostly the issue with gender roles is that they exist mostly the way that they are currently structured. Most gender roles offer men more privileges in the public sphere and women fewer privileges in the public sphere but more in the private sphere. So that's your issue. Your issue are those advantages and disadvantages that come along with gender roles instead of gender roles broadly. So that's an issue you're looking at. So number two, define the problem. Well, if men have more advantages in the public sphere because of gender roles, and women are more advantaged in the domestic sphere, private sphere, but lack those public advantages, what issues arise because of this? What problems are there? So for example, one of those problems might be that women make less money than men do. They have less access to power in the public sphere, which includes earning money. Another problem might be that men have less access to their interior lives, to their children, to their families. And then you might even say that as you define the problem, that we can look at violence as related to masculinity's inability to access emotion or something like that. So you get very detailed about what the problem is. And so it's one thing to say same-sex marriage should be legal, and yes, of course it should be, but what is the problem on many, many levels when it's not? So you want to present the ripple effect or repercussions that exist in the systems of our society because of the issue you've identified. The next section, collect data. So this, if you're doing the gender roles and you're looking at male access to public power and female access to private power or domestic or psychological power, you might want to look at hard numbers. How many women run corporations to show how many women are in government, how many men are stay-at-home dads, or if you're linking this to violence because you think that denying men access to interior life, their own interior life, and to the intimacy of the family in some fundamental way perpetuates violence, maybe you bring in those statistics. So here's where you have a chance to really flesh out and show the scope of your problem and prove that your problem exists. Number 4, you're going to want to interview 2 experts. And the experts you interview can be your family and your friends. If you are writing about these gender roles and one of the things that you feel is a big problem is the lack of intimacy men have within the family, maybe you know that from your own experience because of a male family member who, because of this issue, might not be willing to talk, but that person would be a great person to interview. So you don't have to go to a psychologist or a social worker or a police officer, but you can look to your community in your life for the experts to interview. If you're doing something on single mothers and class, the problems that come with not having transportation in Minnesota in the winter related to class, look at the people you know. There are many, many opportunities, and you should interview them. Your interviews don't just hand me half an hour of audio file or pages and pages of interview. Instead, you're going to want to selectively present the key elements of the interview that tell a story. So edit your interview to present key elements, important information that illuminates the other points that the research project is making. And let's see, number 5, your vision for the future. Really important. You don't want your vision for the future to be an impossible utopia. So my vision for the future is where men and women are equal, gender roles don't exist. Well, okay, that's almost meaningless. Instead, pick something that is real. What is your real vision for the future? 10, 15, 20 years down the road, how might we do things differently? So, what concrete steps can we take toward making that happen? So maybe your vision for the future is that we see a true 50-50 split between men and women staying home as the primary caretaker. Now that might be realistic. How would that vision come to be? So maybe we have universal child care, or we have paternity leave, like maternity leave, concrete things and social systems and public policies that will be in place to support your vision. So for this section, you don't want to just have some slogan-like ideal, but instead build the vision, build the world, and the social policy structures, belief systems that would support the vision. So that is pretty much what I wanted to say about the project. And then the grading rubric, you can see it coincides to all those areas. The general issue, which is the first category, specific problem, and then more points for demonstrating the significance, the experts in the interviews, the vision for the future, and then at the end, we'll comment on other people's projects in the wiki, but that I'm going to talk about in D2L. So all I wanted to do here with the video was talk about the project and your work. And that's it. Be sure to write about your project in the discussion board, run your topics by us, and ask questions as you have them, and have fun.